Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome. And it is a pleasure to be here this afternoon. I wanted to just say the topic today that we are going to be talking about is addressing key selection criteria. And my name is Susan Pincus, and I'm the National Careers Professional with the College of Law. So I just wanted to start the session with an acknowledgement of the country. As we gather for today's webinar, we recognise that many of us are on different lands of different traditional custodians. I would like to acknowledge all of the traditional custodians of the lands we are all present on today, and any Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people who are participating in this webinar. I pay my respects to each of their elders past, present and emerging. A couple of housekeeping matters. The actual webinar today is being recorded and you will each be sent a link so you can access this at any time after the webinar. If you have any questions, if you could leave the questions until the end of the session, so let's say about 1:15, and write those in the Q&A as opposed to writing in the chat. It just makes it a lot easier for me to manage. So if you could just do that, that would be wonderful. And I'm now in a very excited position to introduce you to our panelists. I would like to introduce you first to Lee Horton. And just a little bit about Lee. Lee has had a diverse career working as a lawyer in both the private and public sectors, most recently working as a litigation lawyer with the TAC. She has recently joined the College of Law as a full-time lecturer. We're very excited to have her on board. She holds an LLM in applied law and is a graduate fellow of the College of Law. As a lecturer, her primary goal is to provide practice-focused advice and knowledge to graduates, and she is committed to helping graduates and early career lawyers excel in their first year in practice. Welcome, Lee.
Thank you, Susan.
I'd like to also introduce you to Barbara Quill, Team Leader at State Revenue Office in Victoria. So Barbara's worked in the public sector for the past 15 years, with her current role as Team Leader with the State Revenue Office in Melbourne. Prior to that, she was a Senior Compliance and Residential Tenancy Inspector with the Department of Justice and Community Safety, and also worked with VCAT. She has been an interview panel member on many occasions and has extensive experience with the process of shortlisting candidates, looking through the lens of the government recruitment process. Barb has also worked in the private sector and has first-hand experience dealing with interview techniques and applying for roles. Welcome, Barb.
Thanks very much, Susan.
So I think let's kick off the session. So in terms of what we're going to cover today, the key objectives of the session are to talk about what is key selection criteria and why is it used, and then to talk about what to write or what to think about before you actually jump in and write your response. So what's the process before you actually dive in and start putting your key selection criteria together? So that's really, a lot of work's involved in that. The tools and methodologies that you can use to demonstrate your evidence. So we will go through that as well. And then Barb and Lee will also take you through some examples of what a weak and what a strong response to a key selection criteria looks like. So you'll have a very, very clear idea about what the difference is. And also we'll talk a little bit about how to keep the reader engaged with your evidence. So I suppose at the end of the session, my goal, and also Barb and Lee's, is that we want you to view KSC as a positive step, as a roadmap to building your case that you are the best candidate for a position, rather than seeing it as a bit of a drudge and as a hurdle. So that is going to be the intention, and I'm sure that Lee and Barb will get you very excited and on board with KSC. So I'm now going to pass you over to Lee to kick it off.
All right, so look, at a very basic level, key selection criteria, they consist of a combination of certain personal qualities, mindsets, contextual knowledge, practical knowledge and skills that a candidate for any role should be able to demonstrate when they're applying for a role. So key selection criteria establish that a candidate has the fundamental abilities to properly perform and safely perform specific duties entrenched in a particular role that's advertised. So employers love them because they can save valuable resources and time. They use them to screen and rank candidates quickly and use them to shortlist those that make the grade and then politely reject the others that don't. So every time you apply for, say, a government position, I can almost guarantee you're going to be ranked on your key selection criteria, the answers that you provide. So most of the time they're marked on a scale of, say, 1 to 5. And if you use the STAR or CAR format, which we'll talk about later, and include the right terminology, if you're lucky, you might get 5 out of 5 for an answer. 4 great answers, you've got 20 out of 20. You'll be ranked number 1 on the shortlist and you'll be invited to attend an interview. So that's your goal at the start. But if you don't follow the format that, say, the government would want with their key selection criteria, no matter how experienced or perfect for the role you might be, you're going to get ranked a lot lower and you might miss out getting to the next round. So most of you would have already heard of the STAR and CAR system. They're a bit interchangeable. Usually if you apply for a government position, the website with the position role advertised will tell you directly which format they prefer to use. Today, we're just going to focus on the CAR system. And later, we're going to show you some examples. We're going to show you strong and weak responses to the CAR system, how to break it down, what sort of detail you need. But we're also going to show you today a bit of a secret, and that's how to locate and include in your application, that's how to locate this awesome tool called the Victorian Public Sector Capability Dictionary. Okay, it covers inside the dictionary about 80 buzzwords or 80 capabilities that are found in key selection criteria. And these are things, for example, like collaborative mindset and client focus and conceptual thinking. So it defines them, each of these terms, in such a way that you will know exactly what they mean and how to address them in your application. So that's one of the things we're going to show you today. And if we just move on to slide number 4.
So what is it? Before you even write your responses, what do you have to keep in mind? You really must read the position description really carefully and dissect each criteria. So read it multiple times, get a really good feel of what they're actually asking for. What do they want? Break it down. It's really, really important to break it down. And as you're writing your response, go back to that KSC question and make sure that you're actually answering each area of the KSC. Use the most relevant and recent examples from your legal work or other experience, such as university projects and voluntary involvement. But I think it's really, really important that you write for the audience, for every audience, not just for somebody that perhaps has a law background. Make sure that you, if you're using acronyms, that at the start of using that acronym, you write out specifically what it's meaning. So for instance, I'm from the State Revenue Office, it's the SRO, but I would pop that in brackets, and therefore I can actually then carry on throughout my application just stating State Revenue Office as the SRO. It's really important when you're applying for a role that if you haven't actually had that as an ongoing role, to really write as if you have. So often we see that people will go into an acting role and they'll actually keep demonstrating that through their application. Be confident. You've actually carried out that role. you've actually got the experience. Otherwise, you wouldn't have had that HCD, the higher duties given to you. So it's really important to make sure that that comes across in your application. Answer all the criteria, keep it specified to what they're asking. It's really important to continue to go back to what they're asking. For example, you may get a question that states, tell me about a complex legislative or policy issue. Tell me about how you've interpreted that, how you've applied it to your current role. What was the issue? How was it complex? What was the process? How did you follow the process, and what was the result? So you can really see that it's asking you 3, 4, and even 5 different things within the one actual KSC question. So it's really important to keep going back. For myself personally, I always have the CAR or the STAR acronym at the side. So I'm really going back to that all the time. And as Lee said, we will go through that a little bit later on in slides. It's really important that you don't, get stressed if there are no KSC questions. Quite often you may just say, get to answer one question, why did you apply for this role? And then it's really up to you to look at the KSC and actually put as many areas of your experience, your skills and everything within the application letter. And you can do that if you break down the KSC in the PD. So in the position description, it will actually have what your personal qualities are, what the expertise areas are that they're looking for. And it's really important to then develop that into an application letter. And if you do that, you will be still graded, like Lee said, but it will still get you an interview at the end of the day. So don't panic at all. It's really important that you allow yourself plenty of time and that you make sure that the grammar is correct and that there are no spelling mistakes or typos. There have been lots of horror stories in relation to, myself and other people on panels looking at, candidates' applications and answering the KSC. So, for instance, one candidate addressed a cover letter with Dear Sir and Madman instead of Madam. Another one explained to us that she spoke English, but she actually wrote spinach. And then we had an email from a candidate that stated, I'm key selection criteria for you to review. So it's really important that you read over it, give us time to walk away and then come back and read over it, and then actually get it proofread by somebody if you can. How long should you set aside to answer your KSC? Well, personally, me, I actually take about 3 days. I start off by just putting dot points aside. I start off by reading it and thinking about how am I going to answer this and really breaking it down. Day 2, I actually start to put something into writing and something on paper. And by day 3, I should be able to go back to it, reread it as not the writer, but somebody reading it for me and actually just tweak it a little bit. And then obviously once you've proofread it, once somebody else has proofread it, you should be good to go to put that application in. When you're looking and you see spelling mistakes and you see, incorrect grammar, it really shows lack of detail. And that's something that doesn't really go down well, especially in government organisations.
Absolutely.
So if we could just, thank you, Susan. So if we look at the tools and methodologies to help frame your responses, as Lee mentioned, we've got the CAR and the STAR tools for you. I personally like the STAR tool, which is situation, task, action, and result. And the CAR tool is the context, action, result. Same, but different. We also have, as Lee mentioned, the capability framework and the capability dictionary. Each capability is detailed within the information around, and it does help you with the position description, the recruitment process, the developing capability. So it's really important to take time and do a little bit of research, have as much research there for you to be able to really nail that KSC. So Lee, if we can look at the capability tool.
All right, I've just stopped share, so you should be able
I'll
to see
share
that.
mine. That's okay. There we go. And can you see that?
I can see it, and I hope everyone else can.
Good.
Yep.
So this capabilities tool is a really good tool to have. It's helped me immensely and a lot of other people that I know. If you have a look at the page and say, for instance, you're going to go for a policy role, Lee's going to pop in there, policy, and then she'll press search.
Wow.
It will take a little while. And on the right-hand side, it will show you the 5 capabilities. So you can see it's got personal qualities and skills and so on and so forth.
Nice to click.
Does it want to play nice? Oh, there we go.
There we go. So they're color coded as well. So
They are color coded.
The blue one, the dark blue, are personal qualities. So it's come up with, I think, 16 of those. Then it goes down. So
if you, for instance, clicked on the purple box, which is the skills needed,
we'll go
there we go, in relation to a policy role, for instance, you could click on one of those boxes. So it just click
problem
on
solving. It's just not going to play nice today.
That's fine.
So
that's fine. There we go. There we go. So Lee's clicked on the problem solving skills, and as you can see, it's brought up another box. And if you click on that problem solving skills, it will actually give you a definition of what they want, and then levels of capability. This tool is very, very good. I've had in the past when I've gone for a role, I've sort of thought, oh, have I got the tools needed to be able to do this job? And I've actually used this dictionary in order to break it down for myself and actually show me that I have actually got all the skills, all the attributes needed for that role. And then I've gone on to apply for that role. So it's, a really good tool, and I strongly advise, have a play around with it, have a look at it, because it is something that will probably help you immensely moving forward.
So you might also want to mention, just if you were to click, say, under the recruitment process, if you keep going down, it actually provides you with some sample interview questions that may come your way if there is a question on, say, problem solving in your KSEs. So here it's got some sample interview questions. Describe a situation in which you had to decide a course of action, but none of the courses of actions were clear or appealing. What steps did you take to determine the course of action? So these are really good questions to bring up and make sure you practice a suitable answer to them. Was there anything else, Barb, on those?
No, but as I said, I think it's a really good tool. You can put any word in there. If you put in manager, policy, compliance, legal, it will come up with their capabilities. It will come up with some information for you to be able to utilise.
Also, I think, Barb, you can develop capability as well. It gives you some advice for that as well, which I think is really very valuable as well. Yeah,
it's a really valuable tool to have.
I think it's very exciting. And I can imagine that there'd be so many different contexts that you could use this. So it would be just something that you could use in your job applications in general, and even in terms of, networking discussions, interviews. It's got a whole lot of good, even performance appraisals. It's got enormous use.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's got a lot of, looking at that now, we talk about buzzwords. Using buzzwords and really putting the right words not only into the KSE that you're actually writing, but also even your application letter. They want to see certain words. So it's a really good all-round tool to be able to utilise during, even looking for roles, and then applying for roles as well.
Yeah. No, that's fabulous. That's a really great tool. Okay, so let's go back to the PowerPoint. All right. Can everyone see? I better just share that again. Yeah. Yeah. Okay.
Perfect. So if we talk a little bit more about the CAR tool, it's, as I said, context, action and result. So it actually tells you, give a brief outline of a situation or a setting. Where were you, who and what was involved, and what was your role. That's your context. Your action is, describe the action, including, the examination or the alternatives. How did you use it? The relevant skills in question, and obviously the result. They're wanting to know the outcome. They're wanting to know what happened, and then what was the result of your little story. And I like to actually think of it as a little story. And as I said, I'm more familiar with the STAR process, which is situation, task, action, result. And I always like to have a start, in the middle, and then an end, and obviously keep going back. So it keeps you on track for your answer. It also gives you bonus points, because I can personally tell you the Department of Justice and Community Safety, they actually use the STAR process. So they will know when you're writing, they will know that it's in the STAR format. One thing that I'd like to say is, for an extra point, is if you're answering the KSC and you can actually demonstrate that you've reflected on the situation, that's bonus points, basically. That's a bonus point. So for instance, if I was applying for something in terms of a compliance role, for instance, I was a warrant holder at some stage, and basically I walked around with the staff holding the warrant. When I put it into writing, at the end, I put that on reflection, perhaps I should have stood in one place so everyone included in that warrant knew who the warrant holder was, where that warrant holder was placed, and they could continue to come back to me if there were any issues. So it's really important that if you can show and demonstrate that you can reflect, it's bonus points, and not only in your application, but certainly within your interview as well. If you can throw it in there, throw it in there. It's bonus points, believe me.
Can I ask, just in terms of like how honest would you be in that? Because you also don't want to shoot yourself in the foot, but say there was a situation that with the benefit of hindsight, you would approach it very differently. How do you balance that?
Look, I think you can use it either way. You can use it and be honest and say, I feel on reflection, I perhaps could have done A, B, or C differently. But you can also use it where you say, on reflection, I feel that I did everything in my power on that day and I wouldn't have changed a thing. It's still showing that you're reflecting, and it's still showing that you're thinking about it after.
Yeah.
And I think that's what they want to see, that you can actually look at yourself and say, did I do everything that I could have on that day or in that situation? Or could I have done something differently? Of course, if it's a real flop, you're not going to say, oh, I did a really bad thing. And, you're going to sort of talk it down a little bit. But I think it's really important to have it in the back of your mind. And it's something that you're not going to use all the time. But if you feel it's in the right context, absolutely.
Yeah, I think it does. It talks to self-awareness and also a bit of a growth mindset.
So it's almost as if you're taking that CAR further and you're taking it to the next level. So you do the CAR, the result, and then you can do your reflection after that, if appropriate, at the end.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
So we might move on to the next slide. Which is a CAR example in dealing with conflict. So you can see that this slide has broken it up, and they're talking about a situation. They're saying, while on placement with VLA Magistrates Court program, somebody had to deal with an upset and frustrated member of the public, and what they had to do. What was their role? My role was first point of contact. And then it goes on for the action, and it goes on to the result. For me, that's probably quite a short example. If you're wanting to elongate that example, if you're wanting to, beef it up a little bit, what you could do is you could actually say, well, it was when, where, and how. Use those techniques in how you dealt with the customer, how it made you feel. So you're really elongating the C, the car, the context. It's really, again, in the A, in the action, it's really elongating your story. Remember, I said start, middle, and end. So you're telling a story and you're putting in relevant information, but in that relevant information, you're actually hitting on your experience. You're hitting on your expertise in a certain area. So for instance, you would be, using listening skills and empathy skills, and you would be, making sure that the customer understood that you were listening and that you were taking it seriously. But at the same time, you're actually doing your role. You're carrying out your role as the first point of contact. So it's really important to read it after you've written it, like a story, to see whether you've actually nailed every single component. So for instance, I'm looking at my notes, but for instance, I just sort of put, my role is in the front desk. What does it entail? What do you do? It's to ensure all members of the public coming into the front counter, and then you're creating your story. This is my role. This is, what my daily areas of my role are. This is how I dealt with this customer. I empathized with that customer. I, proceeded to go into a little bit more detail. If you keep the CAR or the STAR process, you will follow that and you will actually be able to demonstrate a start, a middle, and an end. And it's really important in this process to try and use those buzzwords such as I empathized, I listened, I had an understanding. It shows that you can build rapport with the customer. So make sure that when you're writing your KSC for those specific questions, that you are answering each area, and that each area has a couple of buzzwords. Don't overdo the buzzwords, because some people will go, they're just using buzzwords and they don't really, they're just putting them in, and it sort of takes away from what you're trying to do. But certainly if you're wanting to use them, go into that capability tool, put some words in there, throw them in there, and it'll actually give you the definition. And you might actually say, oh, that's a really good way of me to be able to demonstrate what I'm thinking and what I'm then trying to write.
Okay, we're now going to go on to examples of strong responses and weak responses.
Okay, so we've put together here we've got another 2 examples. Whether we have time to go through both of them, we'll see how we go, of basically how to answer key selection criteria questions. And we've used some common categories, and we've broken up the responses that we've written, in this case, into the CAR stages. So you can get an idea of the detail required to produce a strong response. But with each of the steps, we're going to just start with the weak response, and then we're going to show you how to strengthen it. So first up with this example, it's a typical one on leadership and teamwork, and you might be asked a question along the lines of, say, describe your leadership style and provide us with an example for when you successfully led or supported a group. So something along those lines, very popular. So as you can see on this slide, we've started off in the context of CAR. And we've given you an example of what would we see as a weak response. It's not a bad response, it's just a little weak in the circumstances. So it's weak because it has no detail. So the candidate here hasn't really set the scene at all. They haven't given any timeframes about their employment. They haven't given any type of detail with regards to the type of team that the candidate's been involved in. Were they large? Were they small? Were they working on a special team project? What were the teams doing? And importantly, what role did the candidate have in the team? This is just all setting the scene. So another weak point is also, they talk about change management. and how they supported and assisted, but they haven't given any indication on what type of change management. Was it just a small specific workplace policy that was being implemented, or was it a large government reshuffle where it affected everybody? They might have played a large role or a small role. So that's what we would term as a weak response. So if we go to the next one. So this would be a strong response in respect of the same question, okay? Just for you setting the scene and the context. So the candidate here has opened with an appropriate leadership philosophy, and that's just basically how they feel about leadership, how they're going to go about that. And then they give more detail as to the specific type of change management that they helped implement. So in this case, it was business systems and processes. Then they go on to write about being an active member of the team, but they do so in such a way it demonstrates that they've adopted and practiced desirable organisational traits and values, which organisations love. So quality work, displaying effective time management, that sort of thing. So they're actually showing how they've displayed those. And then they've taken it even another step further, and they've listed out every one of those organisational values. So they're not just saying, I adopt organisational values. That's fine. But to give your application credibility and strength, you need to provide further detail. Always try and take it that one step further. And then finally, and this is still setting the context, they've just highlighted yet another area in their leadership style. And in this case, they're putting out there that they lead by example. They're not just saying, I'm a strong leader. They're taking it further. And if we move on to action. So go to the next slide and we'll show you. That's okay.
For some reason, it's being difficult.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
Beautiful. All right. So here is a very quick and brief action response. Now, remember, in this example that we've got, the candidate was asked to write out half a page. So if you added up all those, the C, A and R sections of the weak response, it's only going to be a paragraph, 100 words or so. It's not enough in the circumstances. So here they've said they've stepped into a leadership role and they've supported a new team leader. Good. But again, lacking the information, how they supported the team leader, what leadership role, how long were they there for? And then they've spoken about team members often approach me with problems. What type of problems? How were you able to assist them? So I'll show you, I'll contrast that with our strong action. So as you can see, there's a lot more there, a couple of full paragraphs. So this is a strong response. It specifies time frame. So remember how we said recently in the weak response with regards to them stepping into that role? So that could be interpreted as a very short length of time. So here in the strong response, the candidates, they've spelt it out. So they've got 12 months leadership experience. Now, you might only have 3 months or 3 weeks or 3 days experience in a role, say above the duties that you're in. And that's okay, because the real issue is what you've done in the time that you had. So what you want to demonstrate is that you have, in the time that you had, whatever limited time, you spent that time in some way improving the organisation. You made it more efficient. That's what the prospective employer wants to know. If we give you this role, what are you going to do with it? And what have you done with it previously? This is your chance to show them. In this strong response here, the candidate, they had a 12-month opportunity to demonstrate that they were leadership material, but not everybody gets that opportunity. And so it might be that you have developed a work practice, or you've developed a legal precedent, or you've amended a legal precedent, or you've put in place a better workflow process. Anything that leads to increased efficiency is going to assist, okay? And so what else has this done? So this candidate's also, in this example, they've set out what they've achieved in their previous role, and they've done it in such a way that they've done it step by step. So they haven't just said, I achieved an excellent result. What they've done is they've say how they found the weakness or problem in the team, or the problem in the precedent, or whatever it might be, how they went about formulating a plan to address it, what that plan was, and then how they implemented this plan or course in action. And in this case, I think they went on to provide one-on-one training. Okay, so they've stepped it out in detail, what they did in their 12 months with their plan to help the business become more efficient. And then finally, we'll look at, say, the result part of this answer. And remember, this is all one answer. So this is the weak response. So now the candidates suggested, which is still a positive result, that the work is now shared between team members fairly, and there's better communication within the team, which every organisation wants, and that they hear less complaints. Now, this is good, again, positive result at the end, but you need to be able to back it up with tangible evidence. And if we go to the next slide, I'll show you what I mean, okay? So this strong response for results, it goes so much further. See how it supports the results statement that they've made previously, that they got a good result. And what they've done is they've provided a tangible example of a measurable improvement that they can say is arguably as the direct result of the candidate's plan that he's put in place. So in this case, the candidate's plan has helped a team member hit a KPI. You can see that in the first paragraph. So they're providing hard evidence that the result they got was a great result. And then in the second paragraph, they've given another example. It's not as good as the first one, which is that hit the KPI, because that's a measurable thing. But they've gone on to say, the team's now more cohesive as a result of my plan being implemented. And here the candidate, they put forth that another team member now steps up and helps out others where previously they wouldn't. So this is so much, you'll get so much more kudos for putting forward evidence-based results than if you just say, we had a good result, okay? Now we do have...
Sorry, go on, Lee. Go on. Yeah.
Oh, no, that's fine. That's all I was going to say to that slide. I was going to say we do have a second example if you want me to go through that as well.
Yeah, why not? I think so. We've got time.
All right. So this is the second KSC that we pulled out. So this is all about policy, skills and mentoring. Now, this is a situation, for example, where you think you might just be answering one question, but you're actually answering two KSCs, okay? So commonly in the legal sphere, you might come across a KSC that focuses on policy. And in this case, you might be asked to respond to a question along the lines of, you know, tell us about a time, always that, when you've interpreted and implied complex legislation, policies and procedures in order to reach an outcome or a decision. And then what we've done is we've taken it one step further and we've put in another sneaky one, which says, which is along the mentoring lines, because obviously employers love that you've passed on your knowledge. So then it continues on in this role, so the policy role, you're also required to coach and mentor others to achieve an outcome. So tell us about a time you did this. So that's like a double whammy KSC. And I think Barb spoke about that earlier. Make sure you answer everything, but look at the KSCs carefully. So here in the weak response, the candidates really only focused on the second half of the question. So they've picked up and run with the mentoring thing, and they have missed the opportunity here to talk up their policy and legislation interpretive and skills. And both parts are very important. So if we go to the strong response.
Sorry,
that's okay.
Yep.
So here we go. So again, strong response. They've put in a time frame of 12 months. So they've explained how long they've been coaching and mentoring. They name specific policy and legislation in which they have experience in. And they also set out for the prospective employer what aspect of it they've dealt with. So was it interpretation, or in this case, something even more awesome, which is day-to-day implementation. So they've taken the policy and they're applying it to real life. And then they've also provided information about the candidates that they've been mentoring and coaching. And they've put in their philosophy again, or style, and they've spoken about who they've mentored. So they've set the scene nicely in this one. So here's the action. So here, now we've put in some dot points here, and dot points can work in certain circumstances. So we wouldn't say never use dot points, would we, Barb?
No.
Definitely can work. But again, it's lacking the detail. So if you want to take your action here to the next level, you need to step up, and the candidate needs to explain how all these dot points were done step by step. And that's what they've done in the next slide. Okay, so this, I know it looks like a really long response, but in reality, this candidate was asked to provide a half-page response in total. And when we put together all the CAR, it actually only was a half page. So this is the level of detail that you might need for that. So here they've really done an excellent job in breaking down the steps and at each step supporting it with evidence. For example, the candidate says up the top there, I then move on, they talk about how they train a new staff member and they say, I start with FOG, First Home Owners Grant, and then I move on to core functionality elements of our practice management system. Now they could have stopped there and it still would have been good, but they've actually again taken that step further. So they've actually gone on to say what elements of the practice management system. So they talk about searching for a customer, editing legal names, or doing a payment transfer. So you can see what they've done. They've given credibility to what they are stating that they've done. They're backing it up with evidence, good evidence. And this is what's going to separate out your application from other applications. And the last bit we'll have a look at is the result. And this is pretty self-explanatory here based on what we spoke about earlier. It's very weak. My training these teams has always been successful. But how did he measure being successful? That's what the organisation wants to know. They don't want to know just that you've been successful. They want to know how that's been measured. And team members confidently approached me to ask questions. And then you back this up with the strong response. And this one you can see, you may not have time to read it all, but they give relevant and recent examples that support their claims. They're the evidence to back up what they've said, the details. And then I love it. Oh, I was going to say just finally on that slide, I love it how they've backed it up at the end and they've taken it that one step further and they've gone on and said, you know, not only do I help my team members, here's an example how I've gone over and above in previous roles and I've helped other people outside my team. Just taking it again up and above your average candidate. And that's all I've got, Susan.
Very good.
So it's back over to me. So how do you keep the reader engaged? It's really important to, when reading the KSC, to incorporate some of the KSC words in line with your application and look through the PD, because the position description and the KSC will actually have what they're looking for that you can then apply in your answers and in your application letter. Like Lise stated earlier, bring in your personality. And I could really see in those two examples, when we elongated the answer and when we made it into a story, you could actually really get a sense of who that person was, opposed to, I just did this. It was very generic and very, I just did this. Anybody can write that. So, you know, it's really important when you are writing that you're actually thinking, who's going to be reading this? There are normally 3 panel members with government, normally 3 panel members. One of those panel members, if you're a VPS 5 and above, will normally be somebody from human resources. So they're going to look at it differently to, say, for instance, a manager that wants to employ you to do the role. So it's really important that you write it for every audience and that you make it really, really like a really great story. You don't ramble, you be concise, but you put enough in there to keep them wanting to go, wow, this is a really good story. I want to continue to read this. Yeah, so it's really important to, you know, make sure that you're thinking about who's going to be on the panel, who's reading this, because what catches one person's eye may not catch another's. So it's really important to do that. And when I spoke to you just earlier about buzzwords or strong words, these words are going to capture somebody's eye because they're normally technical and important words. So it's really important to remember that. So, for instance, you can be using the words like team player, hard worker, goal orientated, self-motivated, you know, Just don't overdo it. You can use those words throughout your KSC because you may be answering 2 or 3. Just remember, when you're looking at a position description and it has KSC, there may be 5, sometimes 7, depending on what level role you're going for. Just always remember, they may only say answer 3 of the KSC. They may outline it when you actually log into, for instance, Department of Justice. You'll log in and they'll have the KSC that they want you to answer. But bear in mind, you'll be answering others when you go into your interview. So it's really important to familiarise yourself with all of the KSC. Yeah, use different examples. You can use different examples in your interview to what you're writing in your application, but you can also use the same examples. And really make it easy for the reader to digest. The last thing anybody wants to do is see these big blocks of writing that they just get lost halfway through and they can't be bothered reading it. So let them be able to digest the paragraph. And don't make the dialogue really complex. Let it flow. And then in summary, if we can just go to the next slide, I just want to finish off with always have a start, middle and finish. It's really, really important to familiarise yourself with those, the CAR or the STAR processes. Align to the KSC. Familiarise yourself with what they actually want. Write down on a piece of paper before you even start writing, write down what it is they want. Check for appropriate buzzwords. Use the capability dictionary. Always, always check the grammar. Lee kept writing KFC when we were putting this together. And it was just, we were laughing about it because it's so easy to do. And I thought she may have even said KFC today, but she didn't. So it's really, really important to check your grammar, make sure your spelling's correct and that you're not rambling. You can write a fantastic application for 1 KSC in half a page just by getting it right, using appropriate wording. And in that, if you can do it in half a page, great. If you can do it in a full page, great. But I wouldn't go any further than that. And I would also say that for your application letter as well. I'm a real stickler for, I just want 1 page, and I want everything. I want it all smack bang there in front of me to read. I don't want to be, sifting through 3 pages. And always have somebody proofread it. It's amazing how many times I've had to proofread things for my boss and I've found something and he's probably read it 10 times. So it's really, really important if you've got the opportunity, let somebody else have a read and give you some, constructive criticism. It's really, really beneficial to get some constructive criticism. And for me personally, I like to walk away for a day. I like to write it, I like to leave it, and I like to come back to it and reread it and go, wow, that wasn't great. I'm going to restructure that or tweak it or whatever it might be. But it's really important to just let it go for a day and come back to it for a day. Like an interview, if you're not hitting the mark, they'll tease the answer out of you. Remember that when you're writing your KSC. You need to tease all the information out so that that person that's reading it gets a really, really good overall idea of who this person is and how great they are for the role. And believe me, if you nail the KSC, you'll get an interview. Thank you.
That's great. So I think now what I'll do is I'll stop sharing the screen and let's go to questions. So there's a question here that covers a few different aspects. So I'll just read this out. If there's no word count, how long should a CAR or STAR response be? Brevity is probably key for people reading hundreds of these, plus CVs and cover letters. And then can you repeat any part of the CAR STAR response in the cover letter if it's relevant, or does that come across as lazy?
I think, so I'm going to answer this. Yeah. Look, I think, when you're writing your cover letter, that's your opportunity to tell them how brilliant you are. That's your opportunity to explain to them how you've come, about getting all this wonderful knowledge and experience, and how you've processed it within your role at the time. So you wouldn't ordinarily put in a story for your application. That's, in my personal opinion, I would like to see an application letter telling me about the person, telling me about the experience, how they've gained the experience, how they're going to be able to demonstrate that experience when they get into the role. Because for sure, when I'm writing my application letter, I've already got the job. In my head, I've already got the job, and I'm telling them I'm going to be an asset to you and your organisation, because look how wonderful I am. So that's how I write an application letter. Whereas if I'm writing for the KSC, I'm telling the story, I'm pulling something out of my brain from an experience that I've had, and then I write it as the story. I've had opportunity to use that same question and answer within an interview, and that's okay to do. But just remember, if there's 5 KSC in the PD, and you're only answering 2, likelihood is they'll ask you those other 3 within the interview process. And they may mix it up because they might want to talk to you about your personal qualities as well. So it's really important to familiarise yourself in relation to that. And sorry, Susan, just remind me, there was a third.
In terms of repeating your car or star in the cover letter, if it's relevant, or does that come across as lazy?
If you're going to use it, you need to reword it, because you don't want it to be in the star or car process. It's actually a letter saying, hey, look how good I am. Look at my resume. It's sitting beside the resume. I'm wonderful. This is what I can do for you if you give me the job. This is how I've got all my experience. And it's time to shine. It's how you beef yourself up, because your resume and your application letter is normally the first thing that we'll look at, to make sure that you've got the skills, perhaps, from your resume. Or, if you're going for a management job, we'd like to see somewhere within your resume that you've actually done some sort of management. And then you're actually backing it up with the application letter. And then thirdly, you're backing it up even more by telling them and demonstrating to them in the application, this is when I've used it. This is when I've been a manager. This is what I've done when I've been a manager. This is how I've dealt with things as a manager. So that's how I see you using the CAR or the STAR process.
Okay, we've got a couple more questions that have come in. So this one's actually about CVs, and the person has asked whether hobbies should be added to show work-life balance. I've got a perspective on that, but what about you, Barb or Lee?
Well, I've got a perspective too. I put in hobbies if they're somehow relevant to the role. And I mean that in a way, if it's going to show perhaps transferable skills, or it's going to show what the type of person I am. So if I have a hobby that requires a lot of discipline, maybe attention to detail, that type of thing, and it's a well-known hobby, then I would put that in. But just as an afterthought, I wouldn't make a lot of it. I would just put maybe 1 or 2 hobbies and a line down the bottom. But Barb, you might be different.
I don't put hobbies. Yeah, so okay. I don't put hobbies. My everything that I've got put together for jobs, it's all been quite down the line, quite black and white. I used to, many years ago, more so in the private sector, I'd list my hobbies, especially if it's a team player hobby. But yeah, of late, over the last few years, I've sort of dropped it off, and I only have the most relevant and recent information within my resume, the last sort of three roles, which is, it's been 15 years in the department, government department. So yeah, so I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, even if you did decide to, I mean, I wouldn't call them hobbies. I would call them interests or even extracurricular.
Extracurricular activities.
Yep.
Yeah.
There's the buzzwords.
Yeah. So the next question is from Kazia. What if you're a newbie to the legal sector? Do you give examples of what you've come across of the storyline rather than your own experience? Will that be okay too?
I'd be looking again at transferable skills. So I'd be pulling out any transferable skills I have in another area and showing how I can use them for this current employer if it's not direct experience. That's what I would suggest.
Yeah, so if you haven't, how I would look at it is absolutely what Lee's just said, but I'd also give them a scenario of what would you do if you were in the role? If you haven't had that role before, show them that even though I haven't done the role, I can do the role. It's about being really confident and putting it down on paper. So absolutely, if you haven't held that role, even in a fixed term capacity or HCDs, it doesn't mean that you can't do the role. You just have to, it's just a little bit harder to demonstrate it. It's a little bit like a contract. It's a little bit stronger in writing. So, just make sure that if you haven't held the role, show them how you could, this is what I would do. If I, was in that role, this is what I would do.
Okay, that's really good. I never thought of that. So that's a great a bit of information. Okay, so actually change the CV for each application to include the car or star, not in the cover letter. So should you change the CV for each application to include the car or star, not in the cover letter?
So
yeah.
I think what this person's asking is, should you change it for each role? The PDs are going to be different for every role that you apply for. You can chop and change. One thing that I didn't mention when we were going through the slides is it's really important that if you're going to copy and paste, that you really make sure that you thoroughly go over it, because we've seen in the past people have copy and pasted. And I had one instance where a person had copy and pasted information or, their KSC from one application that they had, gone through, but it wasn't our job. So, and you're not going to get the same questions. You're going to get similar questions, but I really think it's about writing it. Every time I go for a job, I haven't had many, but when I have gone for higher duties, because sometimes they want you to apply for higher duties roles, yes, I've sort of taken bits and pieces, but I haven't just copy and pasted, or if I have, I've changed it a little bit to make sure that it is relevant to the role that I'm going for. So I hope I've answered your question there.
Okay. This one is on the length of a CV and what should be included. Because we've got quite a few other questions, perhaps we can just answer that one fairly briefly.
Yep. So Lee, mine's a page. I have the three roles that I've carried out: VCAT, Department of Justice, and now I've got my state revenue role, and then I've got achievements and key learnings or training that I've carried out. So it's a page.
Yeah, I think it really, really varies depending on your level of experience as well. Mm-hmm. I tend to say about 2 pages, 3 pages probably tops. But I think it would depend if someone is doing maybe a career change, or they've come to the profession later and they've got a lot of transferable skills. I would say you'd want to incorporate that. So whilst 1 page is good, I think you just depends on the level of the position that you're applying for and how much experience you've got. That's just my thought. Yeah. There's another question about when using star or car, how long should a cover letter be? And can you answer more than 1 KSC in one story answer?
So, as we mentioned, the KSC is a question. It's asking you a question, but within that question, you might be answering 5 questions. So it's really important to reread and continue to reread the question, because when you go and have a look at a position description, the KSC within the position description, it will say key selection criteria, and it will dot point maybe 3, maybe 7, up to 7 or even 8 key selection criteria. They will tell you which ones they want you to answer, and they're the ones that you answer, and I wouldn't answer any others. I would only answer what they've requested of you.
Okay. Someone's asked a question about providing referees in the CV. Should you, do you?
That's a difficult one. I think it really depends on the role you're going for and how much experience you have. I've swapped and changed throughout my career, and now I say will be provided on request, but that might not be when I was trying to get positions as a junior lawyer a while ago. I would have provided my references in there. But again, what do you think, Barb?
I've also done the same. So in the past, I've provided 2 references at the bottom of my application, so 2 referees. But the last couple of years, I've actually put available upon request, because I also think if you've got a couple up your sleeve, it's really good to chop and change to you know, help you get that particular role. So, for instance, I have one person that she's a general manager, so I put her down all the time. She's a general manager. She's across all things Department of Justice, and then I would use my current manager. But if I was going for a role that perhaps I didn't have to put, you know, the general manager, but somebody else, I would just swap and change. And that's why I do available on request, because I like to swap and change and keep my options open.
And I was also going to say, I also think it would be really good to be able to prep them as well, your referees. So it'd be good to kind of give them a bit of a call and say, this is the position and these are the competencies. But yeah, if they ask for them specifically, you would definitely want to include them. So I've
actually been asked straight after the interview, can you provide them? So, you know, take that in mind, that you may, you know, if you are fortunate enough to get an interview and you've sort of nailed it in the interview and they ask for your references, you know, have them there to be able to hand over and say, well, there's my references. Yeah. In relation to, sorry, Susan, in relation to what you were talking about, Susan, I actually will always let my references know that I've applied for the role, and I'll actually give them the PD, so they know what's coming.
Yeah.
You know, so they're reading up on it, and they know exactly what answers to give.
Okay, now that's really, that's another good tip. That seems to bring us to the end of questions. So unless, I just noticed that one more has come up. So perhaps we'll just take, thank you so much. That was not a question, that was just an acknowledgement. And there's been some really, really lovely positive feedback saying how useful it was. So I think that this might bring us to the end of the session. And I just wanted to say thank you so much, Lee and Barb, for putting in so much effort into the presentation as well. And I really appreciate your time and putting the cars together and breaking it down. It was so valuable, and I have learned so much as well. And this dictionary is the best thing ever. And I will certainly be encouraging anyone that I speak to, I will be sharing and telling them about this dictionary. So thank you once again. You both have just been wonderful.
Thank you very much, Susan, and thank you for everybody who attended as well.
Yeah, thanks very much, everyone. Thanks for having me, Susan, and for asking me to do this. It's been really wonderful. Thanks.
Thank you. All right. Oh, we're getting lots of thank yous, so that's really nice. All right. Well, I think we'll end the session now. Lovely. Bye for now.
Bye.
Bye.